On Christmas Eve, my ambitious daughter-in-law said, "Dinner is at my mother's. You're staying home." I didn't argue, I simply booked a trip. When she saw my photos and realized I was with her millionaire boss, my phone exploded with messages. "I'm glad you're here. Follow my story to the end and comment on what city you're watching from. That way I can see how far my story has gone. My name is Saneda. I'm 67 years old, and until Christmas Eve, I thought my family tolerated me. It turns out even that wasn't true. I was preparing my famous eggnog in the kitchen when Ashley stormed in. My daughter-in-law had always had that way of walking that made it seem like the world owed her something. But that day, there was something different in her eyes, something cold and calculated. "Saneda, I need to talk to you," she said without even greeting me. She stood in the doorway of my kitchen with her arms crossed, as if she owned the place. "My house? What's wrong, honey?" I asked, wiping my hands on my apron. I'd been cooking all morning, preparing the dishes I knew my son Michael liked. The turkey was already in the oven, the potatoes scalloped, ready to go in. Ashley sighed dramatically, as if what she was about to say was going to take a great deal of effort. "Look, I know this is going to sound harsh, but Christmas dinner is going to be at my mom's this year." She paused, looking me straight in the eye. "You're staying home." The punch I was holding slipped from my hand. I caught it before it crashed to the floor, but my heart had already fallen farther than any glass. "Sorry," I mumbled, sure I'd misheard. "We don't want you at Christmas dinner," Ashley repeated, this time more firmly, as if she'd been rehearsing those words in front of the mirror. "My parents are going to be there, some of Dad's important business associates, and well, we need to make a good impression." I felt like I'd been slapped. "But what about Michael? Does he know about this?" Ashley smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile you save for when you've just won something the other person didn't even know was at stake. "Of course he knows. It was his idea, actually. He says you're, how did she put it, too old to understand what these business scenes are all about." The words hit me like punches. My own son, the boy I raised alone after his father abandoned us when he was 5. The same one who cried in my arms when the other kids made fun of him at school. The one who promised he'd always look out for me when he grew up. "Besides," Ashley continued, clearly enjoying every second of my pain, "I've already told everyone I have a very understanding mother-in-law who totally gets it when we don't include her in certain events. You wouldn't want to make me look like a liar, would you?" I stood there, clutching the apron in my trembling hands, processing what I'd just heard. I had lived in this house for 32 years. 32 years since Michael first brought Ashley to meet me. She had seemed like a sweet girl to me then. How blind I had been, "I understand," I managed to say. Finally, my voice came out calmer than I expected. Ashley blinked, clearly surprised by my reaction. I think she was expecting tears, pleading, maybe some drama. "Seriously, just like that?" "Just like that," I confirmed. "Have a nice dinner." For the first time since she walked into my kitchen, Ashley looked unsure. "Well, perfect. Then Michael and I are leaving in an hour. Dinner is at 6. She turned to leave, but stopped in the doorway. "Oh, and Saneda, maybe it would be best if you didn't post anything on social media tonight, you know, to keep up appearances." When she left, I was alone in my kitchen, surrounded by all the food I had lovingly prepared. The smell of the turkey filled the house, but suddenly it made me nauseous. I sat at the table where I'd eaten countless breakfasts with Michael, where I'd helped him with his homework, where we'd planned his wedding. I didn't cry. It was strange, but I didn't feel like crying. Instead, I felt something different growing in my chest, a strange sensation I hadn't experienced in years. It was freedom, I looked at my phone and opened the travel app I'd downloaded months ago but never used. My fingers moved almost automatically. It had been 15 years since my last real vacation. There was always some reason not to go. Michael needed me. Ashley was pregnant. The grandchildren had some important event, but now, sitting in my kitchen, the aroma of the Christmas dinner we'd never share wafting through the air, I realized something fundamental. No one really needed me. And maybe, just maybe, that wasn't as terrible as I'd thought. The resort that popped up on my screen looked like a dream. Crystal clear water, palm trees, little beachfront cabanas. The price made me swallow hard. $500 for 5 days, all-inclusive. It was more than I'd spent on myself in the last 5 years together. But I had the savings. I'd been putting them aside for when Michael and Ashley needed help with the house or for my grandchildren's college tuition, money I'd never spent on myself because there was always someone else who needed it more. Without a second thought, I made the reservation. As I packed my suitcase, an hour later I heard Michael and Ashley leave. They didn't even say goodbye. I heard the car drive away and then silence. A silence that, instead of feeling empty, felt full of possibility. That night, as my plane took off for the Caribbean, I posted a picture on social media. It was me at the airport, genuinely smiling for the first time in months. The caption read, "New adventures at 67. It's never too late to be brave. I didn't know then that this impulsive decision would change everything. I didn't know that in less than 24 hours I would meet someone who would remind me who I was before I became Ashley's invisible mother-in-law. I didn't know my phone would soon be exploding with desperate messages, but in that moment, watching the city lights disappear beneath the clouds, I only knew one thing. For the first time in years, I had chosen to be exactly where I wanted to be. The resort was even more beautiful than the photos had promised. When I arrived at 10 a.m. on December 25th, I still couldn't believe I was there. Turquoise water stretched as far as the eye could see. Palm trees swayed gently in the tropical breeze, and for the first time in months, I could breathe without feeling a weight in my chest. My cabana was located directly on the beach with a private deck overlooking the ocean. It was small but perfect, decorated in warm colors that made me feel like I had come home after a long journey. I sat on the deck. Sitting with a cup of coffee, watching the sunrise, I realized I hadn't thought about Ashley or Michael in hours. I decided to go down to the resort's main restaurant for breakfast. It was an open-air space with a panoramic view of the sea, filled with families and couples enjoying their Christmas holidays. For a moment, I felt out of place. A woman eating breakfast alone while everyone else seemed to be with someone. I was ordering my eggs Benedict when I heard a deep voice behind me. "Excuse me, would it be all right if I shared your table?" It seems to be full everywhere. I turned around and found myself face to face with a man who made me forget how to breathe for a second. He must have been around 70 years old, with perfectly combed silver hair, blue eyes that seemed to hold stories to tell, and a genuine smile that reached even his fine lines. He wore a white linen shirt and khaki trousers that fit him as if they had been made especially for him. "Of course," I managed to say, gesturing to the chair in front of me. "There's plenty of room, thank you," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Richard Saneda," I replied, shaking his hand. His hand. His grip was firm, warm. "Saneda," he repeated, as if testing how my name sounded in his mouth. "It's beautiful, rare," I blushed like a teenager. It had been years since someone had told me something about me was beautiful. "Thank you. He's on vacation too," Richard smiled as he sat down. "Sort of. I work too much during the year, so I force myself to take these dates off." "And your family?" The question hit me unexpectedly. How do I explain that I was there because my own family had discarded me like an old piece of furniture? It's complicated. I finally said. Richard nodded understandingly. "Families often are." I have 3 grown children, and sometimes I feel like they speak a completely different language than I do. There was something about the way he said it that made me feel less alone. Your children know you're here, of course. In fact, one of them helped me make the reservation. He says I need to learn to relax more. He laughed, and the sound was warm and genuine. And yours is complicated too, I repeated, and Richard didn't press me. We had breakfast together for an hour, talking about everything and nothing. He told me about his travels in Europe, his years as a businessman, his love of opera. I told him about my years as a teacher. The books I liked to read, my garden that had bloomed year after year. You know what, Richard said when we finished eating, I was planning to go snorkeling this afternoon, but it would be much more fun with company. Would you like to join me? I should have said no. A part of me, the part Ashley had trained for years, whispered that it was inappropriate, that what would people think, that a woman my age shouldn't be flirting with strangers at tropical resorts. But a stronger part, a part that had been asleep for too long, shouted, yes, I'd love to, I said. The afternoon was magical. Richard turned out to be an experienced snorkeling instructor, patient as he showed me how to use the equipment properly. We swam among colorful tropical fish that looked like they were straight out of a fairy tale. When I got scared because a larger fish came closer, Richard gently drew me closer and held my hand underwater until I calmed down. It's not dangerous, he said when we got out of the water. Just curious, like us. That night we had dinner together at the resort restaurant. Richard ordered a bottle of red wine that cost $150 without even blinking. When I protested that it was too expensive, he laughed. Sanada, life is too short to drink cheap wine, especially when you're sharing a table with someone special. Someone special. The words echoed in my head throughout dinner. We talked about our dreams. Our regrets, the things we had sacrificed for other people. Richard had a way of asking questions that made me think, that made me remember parts of myself I had forgotten existed. You know what I like about you? He said as we shared dessert. You don't pretend to be someone you're not. It's refreshing. What do you mean? In my professional world, everyone is always acting, trying to impress, to get something, but you're just genuine. His professional world. It was the first time he'd mentioned anything specific about his work, but when I asked, he just smiled mysteriously. Let's just say I spend a lot of time evaluating people, and I've developed a good eye for authenticity. After dinner, we walked along the beach. The sound of the waves was hypnotic, and the full moon created a silver trail on the water. Richard stopped and took off his shoes, inviting me to do the same. At my age, walking barefoot on the beach feels like a little act of rebellion, he said. I laughed, slipping off my sandals. I feel like a teenager running away from home. Is that what you did? Run away? The question caught me off guard. I guess so. For the first time in my life, I put my needs first. Richard stopped and looked me straight in the eyes. Good for you. People who truly love you will never ask you to shrink yourself so they can feel bigger. His words struck a chord. How many years had I spent shrinking myself? How many times had I swallowed my opinions, buried my dreams? I put everyone's needs before my own. When we returned to the resort, Richard walked me to my cabana. At the door, he gently took my hand. Thank you for a perfect day, Sanada. Would you like to have breakfast together tomorrow? Yes, I said without hesitation. I'd love to. After he left, I sat on my private terrace, still feeling the warmth of his hand in mine. I took out my phone to check my messages. There were 3 missed calls from Ashley and a text message. Where are you? Michael says you're not home. For the first time, I didn't reply immediately. Instead, I opened my camera and took a selfie on the terrace with the ocean in the background and a smile I hadn't felt in years. I posted it with the caption, Day 2 in Paradise. Sometimes life surprises you in the most beautiful ways. What I didn't know was that photo, that simple photo of an older woman genuinely smiling for the first time in years, was about to unleash a storm that would change everything. But that night, listening to the waves and remembering the way Richard had said my name, only one thing mattered. Tomorrow I would have breakfast again with someone who made me feel seen, valued, alive. For the first time in decades, I had something to look forward to. The third day at the resort began like the others, with breakfast with Richard at our usual table overlooking the sea. We had developed a comfortable routine that made me feel as if I had known him my whole life. He always arrived with the newspaper under his arm and a smile that brightened my morning. "You know what?" he said as he stirred his coffee. "Last night I was thinking about what you said about being a teacher. It must have been incredibly rewarding, shaping young minds for so many years." "It was," I replied, feeling a familiar warmth in my chest as I remembered my days in the classroom. Although some days I wondered if I was really reaching them. Richard smiled. "Trust me. You were. In my line of work, I've learned that people who truly care always leave a mark, even if they don't realize it at the time." It was the second time I'd vaguely mentioned his job, but something in his tone made me not press him. Instead, I decided to share something I'd been holding on to. "Richard, there's something I need to tell you," I said, nervously fiddling with my napkin. "The reason I'm here isn't exactly a planned vacation." He listened intently as I told him about Ashley, about being excluded from Christmas dinner, about years of feeling invisible in my own family. I didn't mention any names, only that my daughter-in-law had decided I didn't fit into her perfect life. When I finished, Richard was silent, his blue eyes clouded with something that looked like suppressed fury. "That's pure cruelty," he said finally. "No one deserves to be treated like that, especially not by their own family." "Sometimes I think maybe they're right," I admitted. "Maybe I'm too old-fashioned." "Stop," Richard interrupted, his voice firm but gentle. "Seneda, look at me." He waited until our eyes met. "You're an extraordinary woman. Anyone who can't see that is a fool." After breakfast, we decided to take a walk in the nearby town. Richard rented a small golf cart and took me around the local craft shops. He was considerate and attentive, but I noticed him checking his phone several times with a serious expression. "Everything all right?" I asked when his phone rang for the fifth time in an hour. "Work matters," he apologized. "Even on vacation, some things can't wait. Do you mind if I take this call?" "It'll be quick, of course," I said, pretending to examine some seashell necklaces as he walked a few feet away. I didn't try to listen, but his voice came through in windy fragments. "Unacceptable behavior, Master Ashia. Documented lies. Internal investigation." He sounded like someone used to making tough decisions. When he returned, he seemed more relaxed. "Sorry about that. Sometimes I deal with people who think they can cheat the system." "What exactly do you do?" I asked, my curiosity finally getting the better of me. Richard smiled enigmatically. "Let's just say I run a company where integrity is everything. I don't tolerate dishonesty, especially from people who should know better." That afternoon, while we were sipping piña coladas by the pool, Richard got another call. This time I could hear him clearly when he said, "Yes, Ashley Morrison, I've been reviewing your file. The reports you've been submitting just don't add up." My blood ran cold. Ashley Morrison. That was my daughter-in-law's maiden name. Richard continued talking, oblivious to my shock. "Her direct supervisor says Ashley has been lying about her personal situation to gain sympathy and special consideration. Apparently, she fabricated a whole story about caring for a sick mother-in-law to justify her poor performance." My heart started pounding so hard I was sure Richard could hear it. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't process what I had just heard. Richard was talking about Ashley, my Ashley, and he was describing exactly the kind of manipulation I had suspected but never been able to confirm. "Richard," I managed to say, my voice trembling. Can I ask what company you work for? Blackwell Industries, he replied casually. Why did the world stop? Blackwell Industries, the company where Ashley had been working for the past 2 years. The company she kept talking about, where she was desperate for a promotion. The company whose CEO was, you're the CEO? I whispered. Richard nodded. I founded the company a long time ago. 30 years ago. Why? Have you heard of us? I couldn't answer. The irony was so cruel and perfect that I almost laughed. Here I was, falling for a man who happened to be the boss of the woman who had broken me. The same man who had the power to expose all of Ashley's lies. Seneda, you look pale. Are you okay? I need a moment, I murmured, getting up from the sun lounger. I'll be right back. I ran to my cabin, my hands shaking as I fumbled for my phone. I had 17 new messages, all from Ashley. I read them one by one, watching her panic escalate. Seneda, where are you? I saw your picture on Instagram. Please call me. It's urgent. Is that the man in your picture? Who is Seneda? Answer the phone now. Please tell me it's not who I think it is. Oh my God. Are you with Richard Blackwell? Are you with my boss? The most recent messages were pure desperation. Seneda, please don't tell her anything about us. My career depends on this. I can explain everything. It's not what you think. I beg you. Don't ruin my life. I sat on the edge of the bed, reading message after message, watching Ashley crumble as she realized her carefully constructed world of lies was about to collapse. The last message had arrived just 10 minutes ago. I know you think I'm a bad person, but I'm your daughter-in-law. We're family. Don't do this to me. Family. Now we were family. After years of making me feel like a burden. After excluding me from Christmas, after using my existence as an excuse for her poor work performance, now we were suddenly family. A soft knock on my door interrupted my thoughts. Seneda, are you okay in there? I opened the door and found Richard standing in the doorway, looking at me with concern. Go see Richard, I heard Ashley's words echo in my mind. Richard, who had no idea that the woman with whom he'd been sharing the happiest days of the past few years was the mother-in-law of the lying employee I'd just mentioned. Richard, who had been deceived by Ashley just as much as I had. Richard, who had the power to make Ashley face the consequences of years of manipulation and cruelty. I stood up and walked to the door, my heart pounding with a mixture of terror and something that felt dangerously close to justice. When I opened the door, Richard looked at me with genuine concern. What happened out there? You looked like you'd seen a ghost. I looked at this man who had made me feel alive again, who treated me with the respect and tenderness I'd forgotten I deserved. I was telling him the truth about who I was, telling him about Ashley. Richard, I began. My voice barely a whisper. I think we have a lot to talk about. I didn't say anything to Richard that night. I made up an excuse about feeling a little unwell from the sun and promised we'd talk the next day. I needed time to process what I'd discovered, to decide what to do with this information that felt like a ticking time bomb in my hands. That morning at 3 a.m., my phone rang. It was Ashley. Hello? I answered, my voice hoarse with sleep. Senna. Thank God. Ashley's voice sounded desperate, like she'd been crying. I need to talk to you, Ashley. It's 3 a.m., I don't care what time it is, she interrupted. Do you know who that man you're with is? Do you know what this could do to me? I sat up in bed, wide awake. Now, what are you talking about? Richard Blackwell, she said his name like it was a curse. He's my boss, Seneda. He's the CEO of my company, and you're out there with him. Posting pictures like he's your boyfriend. So what if he is? I asked, surprising myself with my defiant tone. Ashley was quiet for a moment. So what if he is, Seneda? Do you have any idea what I've had to do to keep my job? Do you know the stories I've had to tell? Enlighten me, I said tersely. I've been telling people at work that I have very demanding family responsibilities, that I have to take care of a mother-in-law who requires a lot of attention. There it was, confirmation of what I'd suspected, a mother-in-law who requires a lot of attention, I repeated slowly. Are you referring to me, Seneda? Please let me explain. Explain how you've been using my existence as an excuse for your poor job performance. I interrupted, feeling a cold fury rising in my chest. Explain how you've been pretending I'm a sick burden when you didn't even want me at your Christmas dinner. Ashley started to cry. You don't understand the pressure I've been under. My job is very competitive, and I needed something to garner a little sympathy. An edge. An edge. You used your own mother-in-law as a strategic lie to gain an advantage at work? Doesn't it sound like that? My voice was rising. Ashley, you excluded me from Christmas because I was an obstacle to your perfect image, but at the same time you were telling your boss you were a self-sacrificing daughter-in-law taking care of a needy mother-in-law. How exactly is that supposed to sound? Ashley's crying intensified. I know. It was stupid, but Seneda, if Richard finds out I lied about our relationship, about the whole family situation, I'll lose my job. And not only that, he has me shortlisted for a major promotion. This promotion could change my life. Your life, I repeated, and what about mine? What about the years I spent feeling like an outsider in my own family? We can fix that, Ashley said quickly. We can start over. We'll include you in everything from now on. You can come to dinner every Sunday. You can spend all the holidays with us. And all I have to do is keep your secret. It's not just my secret. Seneda, it's our family secret. If this gets out, it's going to affect Michael, too. Do you really want to ruin your daughter-in-law's career and possibly cause problems in your son's marriage? There was the manipulation I knew too well. Now it was my fault. If anything bad happened, it would be because I hadn't protected the family. Ashley, I said slowly, have you ever considered that maybe, just maybe, the consequences of your lies are yours to face? What does that mean? It means I'm not responsible for cleaning up the mess you created. There was a long pause. When Ashley spoke again, her voice had changed. It had become cold, calculating. Seneda, I hope you know what you're doing. Richard Blackwell isn't just my boss, he's one of the most powerful men in the industry. And when he finds out you've been lying to him about who you really are, when he discovers you're the mother-in-law of one of his employees and you didn't tell him. What, Ashley? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Well, let's just say men like Richard don't like feeling manipulated. What do you think he's going to think when he realizes this whole tropical romance has been a lie from the start? Her words hit me like a slap in the face. She was right about one thing. I hadn't told Richard who I really was, but the reason hadn't been to deceive him. It had been. What? Fear? Shame? A strange need to protect the very person who had hurt me so much? Think about it, Seneda, Ashley continued, her voice like poisoned honey. He's going to think you went to that resort specifically to seduce him, to manipulate him in favor of his troublesome employee. He's going to think it was all an elaborate plan. My heart started racing. What if she was right? What if Richard found out the truth and thought I'd been playing him all along? It doesn't have to be that way, Ashley said, her tone turning persuasive. You can simply not mention our connection. Enjoy your romance. When you get back home, we can pretend your trip was completely separate from my work. No one ever has to know, except that it's too late for that. I said, don't you think it's strange that my daughter-in-law works for the same company as the man I casually met on my vacation? No, we never even mentioned my maiden name. Your last name is different from mine. Your first call last night, you told him it was complicated with the family. You can just keep it complicated. It was amazing. Even now, even as her world was crumbling, Ashley was still trying to manipulate the situation to her advantage. Ashley, I finally said, I'm going to hang up now, and when I wake up tomorrow, I'm going to decide what kind of person I want to be, the one who protects the people who hurt her, or the one who finally protects herself. Seneda, wait. I hung up and put the phone on silent, but I couldn't go back to sleep. I sat on my terrace watching the ocean under the moon, thinking about the conversation I would have to have with Richard, because Ashley was right about one thing. I had been deceiving Richard by omission. I hadn't told him who I really was, and every hour that passed without telling him made the lie bigger. At 6 a.m., as the sun began to rise, I made a decision. It was time to tell the truth, no matter the consequences. When I went downstairs for breakfast, Richard was already at our usual table, but something was different. He had his laptop open, and several documents were scattered around his coffee. He looked professional, like the guy he really was, not the laid-back vacationer I'd come to know. Good morning, he said as I approached. But his smile seemed strained. Are you feeling better? I said, sitting down across from him. We need to talk. He slowly closed his laptop. Oddly enough, I said, I was about to say the same thing. My heart sank. What do you mean? Richard looked me straight in the eye, and for the first time since I'd known him, I saw something cold in his gaze. Seneda, he said calmly, is there something you want to tell me about your family, specifically your daughter-in-law? The air between us thickened like honey. Richard was looking at me with that expression I'd seen on business calls, calculating and cold. He was the CEO now, not the man who had taught me to snorkel. How did you know? I asked. My voice barely a whisper. Richard sighed, closing his laptop completely. Ashley Morrison sent me an email last night, a very interesting email, in which she confessed that she'd been lying about her family situation for months. He paused, studying my face. She also mentioned that her mother-in-law, a woman named Seneda, was on vacation at the same resort as you. I felt as though the ground beneath my feet had opened up. Richard, I started, my voice controlled, but I could hear the disappointment underneath. I didn't know what. You didn't know what exactly? He asked, his voice controlled. But you didn't know I worked at Blackwell Industries? Or didn't you know your daughter-in-law has been using your name to justify her poor work performance? I didn't know either of those things when I met you, I said quickly. Richard, you have to believe me. I had no idea who you were. Richard leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving my face. Go on. Yesterday, when you were on that phone call near the craft store, I heard you mention Ashley Morrison. I nearly passed out. The words tumbled out. Now, that's my daughter-in-law, the same woman who excluded me from Christmas dinner because I didn't fit her perfect image. Richard's expression softened slightly, but his posture remained rigid. And why didn't you tell me anything last night? Why? I stopped, searching for the right words. Because I was in shock, and because I was scared you'd think this was all somehow planned. And it wasn't. The question hurt more than I expected. Do you really think I'm capable of something like that? Richard was silent for a long moment, studying me. I could see the internal battle in his eyes. The man who had gotten to know me was fighting against the CEO who had learned to distrust people. Tell me about Ashley, he finally said. Tell me about your relationship. So I told him everything. I told him about the years of being treated like a second-class citizen in my own family. I told him about the Christmas dinners where I was sat at the kids' table, about the family photos where I was cut out or positioned on the edges. I told him about the way Ashley spoke to me when no one was listening and how she transformed into the perfect daughter-in-law when Michael showed up. And Christmas Eve, I continued, my voice breaking slightly, she told me to stay home because I might ruin the impression with her family's important guests. Richard listened without interrupting, his expression growing more somber with each detail. When I finished, he sat silently for several minutes. "Seneda," he said finally, "do you know what Ashley told me about her family situation?" I shook my head, though I could imagine. She told me she had a sick, demanding mother-in-law who lived with them, that she had to take care of her constantly, drive her to doctor's appointments, manage her medication. She said that was why she was sometimes late for work, why she seemed exhausted, why she couldn't do overtime. His voice hardened. She used that story to get flexible hours, to avoid business trips, to justify mistakes on important projects. I felt a wave of nausea, but I live alone. I haven't lived with them a single day since they got married 6 years ago. I know, Richard said gently. After receiving her email last night, I made a few calls. It's surprising what you can discover about someone when you really want to know the truth. What did you discover? I asked, my voice trembling. Richard opened a folder next to his laptop. I found out that Seneda Morales, 67 years old, lives alone in a house she bought 30 years ago and fully paid off herself. I found out she worked as a teacher for 42 years and retired with honors. I discovered she's never had any serious health problems, and according to her neighbors, she's one of the most independent people they know. Tears filled my eyes, not out of sadness, but something more complex. It was the first time in years that someone had bothered to learn who I really was. I also discovered, Richard continued, that your daughter-in-law has been submitting falsified reports about her productivity. She's been blaming her family situation for her missed deadlines, when in reality it's due to her lack of preparation. She lied in her last performance evaluation, saying she couldn't take the regional manager promotion because she had too many responsibilities at home. A promotion to regional manager, a position that includes a $60,000 annual salary increase and that Ashley had been desperately pursuing. I processed this information with a strange mixture of vindication and sadness. And what are you going to do? I asked. Richard looked me directly in the eye. That's an excellent question, Seneda, because honestly, I'm not sure. What do you mean? I asked. I mean that professionally, Ashley has violated multiple company policies. She's lied, falsified information, and used those lies to gain unearned benefits. Under normal circumstances, she'd be fired immediately. My heart began to beat faster. But, Richard continued, the woman sitting in front of me is the most genuine and honorable person I've met in years. And I don't want my feelings for you to influence my professional decisions in any way. Richard, let me finish, I said. I also realize that if I take action against Ashley immediately after meeting you, it'll seem like it's out of personal revenge, and that wouldn't be fair to either of us. I felt a sharp pang of panic. Are you saying we can't do anything? I'm saying, he gently interrupted, that I need to be completely transparent with you about my decision-making process, and I need you to be completely honest with me about what you want to happen from here. I looked him in the eyes. This man who, in just 4 days, had made me feel more valued than I had in years, and I made the hardest decision of my life. Richard, I said slowly, I don't want you to do anything for me. I don't want you to make any decisions about Ashley based on how you feel about me. His expression softened. Are you sure? I'm sure. If Ashley faces consequences, it should be because her actions deserve it, not because of our connection. I breathed deeply. But I also need you to know something else. What? Richard asked. In these 4 days with you, I've remembered who I really am. I've remembered that I deserve to be treated with respect and kindness. I've remembered that my voice matters, that my feelings matter. I took his hand across the table. And if you have any doubts about my motives, if there's any part of you that thinks this was some kind of elaborate plan, then you need to tell me now. Richard turned his hand to take mine. I have no doubts about you, Seneda. None. Then what do we do now? I asked. Richard smiled for the first time that morning. Now, we finish our vacation. We enjoy these last 2 days without thinking about Ashley, without thinking about work, without thinking about anything, except getting to know each other better. And then, after we return to our real lives, we'll see what happens. I'll handle the situation with Ashley like I would with any employee who's violated company policy. And you, he paused, what do you want to do? For the first time in years, the answer was clear. I want to be free. 3 months had passed since my return from the Caribbean. 3 months since my life changed completely. And not just because of what happened to Ashley. I was sitting in my backyard garden, the same garden I'd cultivated for 30 years, but now it looked different. I'd planted new flowers, brighter colors, varieties I'd wanted to try for years but had never dared to. Like everything in my life, lately, I'd decided to be braver. Richard was coming to dinner tonight. He'd been coming on weekends for the last 6 weeks since we officially started dating after he returned to the city. It was strange and wonderful to have someone look at me like I was the most interesting part of their day. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Michael. Hi, Mom. His voice sounded tired. Hi, honey. How are things? Well, that's why I'm calling. Michael sighed heavily. Ashley lost her job. I know, I said simply. Richard had told me when it happened. 2 weeks after our return, Ashley was fired after an internal investigation revealed not only the lies about me but several other discrepancies in her work reports. Did you know? Michael asked. How? I think there are some things you need to know about what really happened. I told him everything about being excluded from Christmas dinner, about the trip, about meeting Richard, and finally, about the lies Ashley had been telling at work. Michael listened silently, and I could hear his breath becoming more labored as the story unfolded. Mom, he finally said, his voice breaking, I didn't know any of this. Ashley told me you chose to spend Christmas alone because you needed space to reflect. Of course she did, I said, and didn't you think to ask me directly? There was a long silence. I guess I thought it would be easier to believe her version. It meant I didn't have to deal with the conflict. It was an honest answer, and it hurt precisely because of that. Michael, why do you think I never told you how Ashley treated me? I don't know, Mom. Because I didn't want you to feel like you had to choose between us. Because I knew you'd choose your wife, and you were right to do that. But that didn't mean I had to stay and be mistreated. Ashley says it was all a huge misunderstanding, that she never meant to hurt you, and that the things at work were just small lies that got out of control. And what do you think, Michael? I asked, my voice heavy with emotion. Another long pause. Honestly, Mom, I've been married to Ashley for 6 years, and I've never seen her as scared as she was when she realized you met her boss. That's not the reaction of someone who's just told a few harmless lies. I felt a small spark of hope. Maybe my son was finally starting to see the truth. Mom, can I come see you this weekend? Just me. I think we really need to talk, of course, honey, but you need to know that Richard will be here, your boyfriend? Michael asked, and I could hear what sounded like a smile in his voice. Yes, my boyfriend, I said, smiling too. It still felt strange to say it at 67, but it was a wonderfully strange feeling. I'm happy for you, Mom. I really am. After hanging up with Michael, I began preparing dinner for Richard. I decided to make lasagna, something I hadn't cooked in months because Ashley always complained it was too heavy. It felt liberating to cook for someone who appreciated my food. Richard arrived at 6 p.m., as always, with a bottle of wine and fresh flowers from his garden. He developed the habit of bringing flowers every week, different kinds each time, because he'd noticed how my eyes lit up when I saw them. "How was your day?" he asked, kissing me softly on the cheek before sitting at the table. "Interesting," I said, serving him a plate. Michael called. "Ashley officially lost her promotion." Richard nodded. "They gave it to Marcus Chen. He deserved it. He's been working for that position for 3 years. How's Ashley handling everything?" I asked, my curiosity getting the better of me. Richard looked at me carefully. "Do you really want to know?" "I think so. Since she was fired, she's been sending emails to HR claiming discrimination. She says she was unfairly treated due to family issues beyond her control." I was not surprised. She's also been spreading it on LinkedIn, claiming she was the victim of inconsistent corporate policies. "Of course she has," I said, unable to hide my frustration. "Ashley has never taken responsibility for anything in her life. HR reviewed her case and determined the firing was completely justified. Plus, when other employees found out the real reason she was fired, several came forward with their own stories about lies Ashley had told over the years. I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. Relief because there were finally consequences for Ashley's actions, but sadness because it meant Michael was going through a tough time at home. You know what the most ironic part is?" Richard continued. "If Ashley had just been honest from the beginning, if she'd admitted she sometimes struggled to balance work and personal life like everyone else, we probably would have worked with her. Blackwell Industries has very flexible policies for employees who honestly communicate their needs. But that would have required her to admit she wasn't perfect." "Exactly," I said, nodding. "Some people prefer to build castles of lies instead of solid foundations of truth." After dinner, we sat on the back porch, Richard's arm around my shoulders as we watched the stars. It was a warm spring night, and my garden was in full bloom. "Seneda," Richard said softly, "there's something I want to ask you." "What?" "I've been thinking a lot about us, about where this relationship is going." My heart began to race, but not from fear, from anticipation. I've spent the last 10 years living alone, convincing myself I was too old for romance, too set in my ways to adapt to someone else. He turned to look at me. "But with you, I feel like I've woken up from a long sleep." "Richard," I began. "Let me finish," he smiled. "I'm not going to propose to you tonight, although honestly, I've been thinking about that too. But what I do want to propose is something different." "What?" "A trip. A real trip, not just a weekend at the resort. I was thinking about Europe, Paris, Rome, maybe Greece. 2 months, just you and me, seeing the world." I looked at him, this man who, in just 6 months, had completely changed my perspective on what was possible in life. 2 months, I have the vacation days saved up, and you've just begun to truly live. What do you say?" "I say yes," I said without hesitation. "I absolutely say yes." Richard kissed me then, softly and deeply, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. 6 months later, when we were standing in the Eiffel Tower, watching Paris spread out beneath us, I received a message from Michael. It was a photo of him with his kids. My grandchildren, in a park. The message read, "The kids want to know when Grandma Seneda is coming back from her adventure. Ashley moved out last month. I'm learning to be a better father and a better son. I love you, Mom." I stared at the photo for a long moment, then showed it to Richard. "Are you ready to go home?" he asked. "Eventually," I said, taking his hand. "But for the first time in my life, I have no hurry to get anywhere. I have all the time in the world, and for the first time in 67 years, that feels perfectly true." As we walked through the streets of Paris that night, I thought about Ashley. Not with anger or resentment, but with something closer to pity. She'd had every opportunity to build a real relationship with me, to create a truly loving family. Instead, she'd chosen manipulation and lies. But her choice had freed me. Her cruelty had pushed me toward the courage I needed to reclaim my life. Sometimes, I thought, as Richard told me about the plans he had for our next destination, the greatest gift someone can give you is teaching you that you don't need them. And that gift, as painful as it was to receive, had turned out to be the beginning of the best part of my life. 3 months had passed since my return from the Caribbean. 3 months since my life had changed completely. And not just because of what happened with Ashley. I was sitting in my backyard garden, the same garden I had cultivated for 30 years. But now it looked different. I had planted new flowers, brighter colors, varieties I had wanted to try for years but had never dared to. Like everything in my life recently, I had decided to be braver. Richard was coming over for dinner that night. He had been coming on weekends for the past 6 weeks since we officially started dating after he returned to the city. It was strange and wonderful to have someone look at me like I was the most interesting part of their day. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Michael. "Hi, Mom." His voice sounded tired. "Hi, honey. How's everything?" "Well, that's why I'm calling." Michael sighed heavily. "Ashley lost her job." "I know," I said simply. Richard had told me when it happened. 2 weeks after our return, Ashley had been fired after an internal investigation revealed not only the lies about me but also several other discrepancies in her work reports. "Did you know?" Michael asked. "How? I guess I know everything now, Michael," I said, feeling the sting of betrayal, but also the weight of truth finally settling in. He paused for a long time. I guess it was easier to believe her version. It meant I didn't have to deal with conflict. "That's an honest answer, and it hurts because it's true," I replied. "Michael, why do you think I never told you about how Ashley treated me?" "I don't know, Mom. I guess I thought you'd just want to stay out of it. I thought you'd be okay." I could hear his voice crack. "Ashley says it was all a big misunderstanding, that she never meant to hurt you and that the things at work were just small lies that got out of control." "Tell me, Michael. How is she handling all this?" I asked, my voice shaking a bit. "I think you already know how it's going, Mom," he replied. "She's devastated. And when she found out that you had met Richard, that's when she really broke down. She's terrified of losing everything." "Are you still with her, Michael?" "She says she wants to fix things. She's telling me she'll do anything, but I don't know if I can trust her anymore." He paused for a moment. "Can I come over this weekend? Just me? We really need to talk." "Of course, honey," I said, holding back tears. "But you need to know that Richard will be here." "Your boyfriend?" Michael asked, a small, amused chuckle in his voice. "Yes, my boyfriend," I smiled softly. "It feels nice to say that. I'm happy for you, Mom." "I really am." After hanging up with Michael, I began preparing dinner for Richard. I had decided to make lasagna, something I hadn't cooked in months because Ashley always complained it was too heavy. Cooking for someone who appreciated my food felt like a small victory, like I was finally doing something for myself. Richard arrived right on time, at 6 p.m., as always, with a bottle of wine and fresh flowers from his garden. He had developed the habit of bringing flowers every week, different ones each time, because he had noticed how my eyes lit up whenever I saw them. "How was your day?" he asked, kissing me gently on the cheek before sitting down at the table. "Interesting," I replied, serving him a plate. Michael called. Richard nodded. "Ashley lost her job?" I nodded. "Yes. It's official. The company fired her after an investigation." Richard sipped his wine. "She got what she deserved." Did you know about this investigation? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. He looked at me, his expression serious. I do now. I've been looking into her file for a while. Let's just say I know things about Ashley that would make her squirm. Things that she doesn't want anyone to know, like what? I asked, genuinely curious, but also afraid of what might come next. She's been lying for months, claiming to have a sick mother-in-law at home, using it as an excuse for missed work and poor performance, he said quietly. She's also been manipulating her coworkers and boss to cover up her mistakes. It's all been part of an elaborate scheme to keep her job and gain special treatment. I was silent for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in. Ashley had used me as an excuse, painted me as a burden when in reality, I was just trying to live my life without interference. The guilt of her actions weighed heavily on me. I know you've been hurt by her, Saneda, Richard continued. But you need to understand something important. He paused, placing his wine glass down gently. People like Ashley don't change. They use others to climb their way to the top. And they don't care who gets hurt in the process. She didn't care about you or your family. She only cared about herself. Are you going to fire her? I asked, a sense of dread washing over me. Richard sighed deeply. I have to be careful. I want to handle this professionally. I've already taken the necessary steps. But it's not about revenge. It's about fairness and integrity. I'm not going to let someone manipulate me, or you, any longer. The conversation shifted to lighter topics after that. We talked about everything and nothing, enjoying the peace of the evening. It was the first time in a long time I felt truly at ease, knowing I was no longer a pawn in someone else's game. The next morning, as we sat on the porch enjoying coffee, Richard's phone rang. I could hear him talking, his tone sharp and focused. Yes, I've been reviewing her file, Richard was saying. I know about Ashley Morrison. She's been lying about her situation, claiming to care for a sick mother-in-law. It's all fabricated. She's been manipulating her work situation to avoid responsibility and gain sympathy. I froze, realizing that the sick mother-in-law story Ashley had been telling for months was about me. She had used me as a shield, a scapegoat, all the while pretending to care for me, Richard continued, oblivious to my shock. I've already informed the HR department. We're taking appropriate action. This kind of behavior won't be tolerated. The phone call ended, and Richard looked at me, concern in his eyes. You okay? I nodded, trying to maintain my composure. Yes. It's just a lot to take in. He gave me a comforting smile. I'll handle it, Saneda. You don't have to worry about Ashley anymore. Later that afternoon, Richard and I decided to take a walk around the local town. We rented a small golf cart, and he showed me the craft shops and local sites. As we were talking, his phone buzzed again. Richard excused himself and stepped a few feet away to take the call. I overheard fragments of the conversation. Yes, I've been reviewing Ashley's file. Discrepancies in her reports. Her supervisor has confirmed the lies. The conversation went on, but I couldn't focus on the rest of it. My mind was racing. When Richard returned, he seemed more relaxed. Sorry about that. Some work issues to handle. Everything okay? I asked, trying to gauge his mood. Yeah, just some problems with people thinking they can cheat the system. I don't tolerate dishonesty. I get it, I said. But, Richard, what exactly do you do? He smiled enigmatically. Let's just say I run a company where integrity is everything. I don't tolerate dishonesty, especially from those who should know better. That night, as we sat at the resort's restaurant, Richard got another call. This time, I could clearly hear him say, "Yes, Ashley Morrison." I've been reviewing her file. The reports she submitted. They don't add up. My heart stopped. The last name caught my attention, Ashley Morrison. My daughter-in-law, Richard continued speaking, unaware of my shock. She's been lying about her personal situation to gain sympathy and special treatment. She fabricated the entire story about caring for her sick mother-in-law to cover up her poor performance. The reality of what Ashley had done sank in. She had been using me as an excuse, manipulating everyone around her, and now Richard, the CEO of her company, was the one exposing her lies. Later that evening, Richard and I were walking along the beach. The waves crashed against the shore as the full moon illuminated the water. Richard stopped, taking off his shoes, inviting me to do the same. At my age, walking barefoot on the beach feels like a little act of rebellion, he said with a laugh. I followed suit, slipping off my sandals. I feel like a teenager running away from home, I replied, laughing too. Is that what you did? Run away? Richard asked. I paused, caught off guard by the question. I guess so, I answered. For the first time in my life, I put my needs first. Richard stopped and looked at me. Good for you, he said, his voice warm. People who truly love you will never ask you to shrink yourself so they can feel bigger. His words struck a chord in me. How many years had I spent shrinking myself, putting everyone else's needs before my own? How many times had I swallowed my opinions and buried my dreams? I had spent so long trying to please others, trying to fit into a mold that wasn't mine. The following days were filled with light-hearted conversations with Richard, snorkeling adventures, and slow walks on the beach. It felt like a dream. For the first time in a long time, I felt free, seen, and valued. But, as with all things, the reality of my situation crept back in. Ashley's lies were only the beginning. What would happen when she found out that Richard was the CEO of the company she had been lying to? The morning after our snorkeling adventure, as Richard and I sat at our usual table overlooking the ocean, I could tell something had changed. Richard's usual relaxed demeanor was replaced by a quiet intensity. He was looking at his phone more than usual, his brow furrowed in concentration. Finally, after a long silence, he looked up at me and said, Sanada, I need to talk to you about something. It's about Ashley. I set my coffee cup down slowly, sensing that whatever was coming wasn't going to be easy. She's been calling me nonstop since we arrived. Richard continued. I've been doing some digging into her file, and it's not good. I felt a chill run through me. I had known something was off, but hearing Richard confirm my suspicions made everything feel real in a way that was hard to ignore. What do you mean? What did you find out? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Richard hesitated before answering. Ashley has been using her position in the company to manipulate her situation. She's been lying about her family life, and now it's all starting to come to light. Her supervisor reached out to me with concerns about her performance, and I found discrepancies in her reports. I felt a knot form in my stomach. Ashley, my own daughter-in-law, had been lying to me, using me as a pawn in her game to advance her career. My first instinct was to feel angry, but it quickly gave way to something deeper: betrayal. Is she being fired? I asked, my voice quiet but firm. Richard sighed. I'm not sure yet. But I have a feeling that things are going to get very complicated for her. She has a lot to answer for. And I'm not the only one she's been deceiving. Later that afternoon, Richard and I went for a walk through the nearby village. I wasn't fully present, my mind constantly returning to what Richard had said about Ashley. It was hard to believe that the woman who had once been so kind to me, who had welcomed me into her home, could be capable of such manipulation. We passed a small cafe, and Richard suggested we stop for a drink. We sat outside at a table with an ocean view, and I tried to push the thoughts of Ashley to the back of my mind. But it was impossible to forget everything I had learned. Ashley had used me to cover up her own lies, and now she was in danger of losing everything. Just as I was starting to relax, Richard's phone buzzed again. I saw his face harden as he glanced at the screen, his expression shifting from calm to serious. "Excuse me," he said, standing up. "I need to take this call." I nodded, watching him walk a few feet away to answer the phone. I didn't try to listen, but I could hear bits and pieces of the conversation, something about a report, a meeting, and the name Ashley Morrison repeated several times. My heart skipped a beat as I realized just how deep this situation had gotten. When Richard returned, he was more somber than before. "I have to go back to the office tomorrow," he said, his voice tight. "There's a lot to sort out with Ashley's case." I nodded, trying to stay composed, but the weight of everything hanging between us was starting to feel too much to bear. "You'll handle it," I said softly. "You've always been honest with me." That's something I never thought I'd have to say to anyone. Richard gave me a small, understanding smile. "I just wish Ashley had been as honest with me." The next morning, Richard was already up early, his laptop open and a stack of documents beside him. I could tell he had a lot on his plate, but he still made time to sit with me for breakfast. "So, what's the plan now?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady despite the uncertainty I felt inside. Richard ran a hand through his silver hair, his gaze fixed on the papers in front of him. "I'll meet with HR later today. We're going to discuss Ashley's situation and determine the next steps. It's clear she's violated company policies, and there are a lot of people who are waiting for her to be held accountable." I swallowed hard, the guilt I had been suppressing finally surfacing. "I never imagined it would get this far," I admitted. "I thought I knew her, but now I see everything she's been hiding." Richard nodded, his expression softening. "People do strange things when they think they have something to gain. But what Ashley didn't realize is that the truth always comes out in the end." I could feel my heart start to race. I had always known that the truth had a way of catching up with people, but now it was my daughter-in-law who would face the consequences of her actions. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "We wait," Richard said simply. "I'll handle things with the company. But for now, you don't need to worry. You're here, and that's what matters." Later that day, I got a text from Michael. It had been a while since we'd spoken, and I could feel the tension building between us. "Hey, Mom, I know things have been tense between us lately, but I wanted to check in. Are you doing okay?" I sat down on the porch, the ocean breeze tugging at my hair as I stared at the message. Michael was my son, the one I had raised, the one I had always put first. But in that moment, I realized that I had spent so much of my life putting everyone else's needs before mine. It was time to change that. I responded with a simple message. "I'm okay, Michael. We need to talk when I get back." The next few days passed in a blur. Richard and I continued to spend time together, enjoying the peace of the resort, but there was a constant undercurrent of tension. I knew things weren't over, that Ashley's actions had set a chain of events into motion that couldn't be undone. By the time I returned from my vacation, the tension between Michael and me had only increased. I had barely spoken to him since our last exchange, and he had yet to ask me about the details of what had happened with Ashley. I knew, deep down, that he was probably trying to avoid the truth. He didn't want to know the full extent of his wife's lies, but I couldn't protect him from the inevitable anymore. As soon as I stepped off the plane, my phone buzzed with a message from Michael. "Mom, I need to see you. Can you meet me at the house? It's important." I hadn't been back to the house since I left for the resort. Since everything had unfolded, I had been living in the small rental apartment, quietly reclaiming my space, finding my independence again. But now, Michael wanted to talk. Part of me dreaded what would come next, but I knew it was time to face the truth. When I arrived at the house, Michael was already waiting for me in the living room. The tension in the air was thick, and I could tell he'd been pacing. His face was drawn, and I could see the guilt in his eyes before he even spoke. "Mom, I need to apologize," he started, his voice low and shaky. "I've been avoiding the truth, and I should have confronted Ashley about everything. But I didn't know how. I didn't want to lose her, and I didn't want to lose you." His words hit me like a wave. I had never imagined that Michael, my own son, would be in the middle of such a mess. He had always been my pride, the one I had raised with so much love, and yet, I couldn't help but feel betrayed by his inaction. "I've been so blind, Mom. I didn't want to see what was happening," Michael continued. "Ashley lied to me about everything, about you, about her family, about what was really going on. And now I see it. I see everything. And I feel so stupid for not seeing it sooner." I stood there, listening to him pour out his heart. The old part of me wanted to wrap him in my arms and tell him everything would be okay, but I couldn't do that anymore. He needed to understand that this was not just Ashley's fault. This was about his choices, his role in allowing her to treat me the way she did. "You're right, Michael," I said quietly, my voice steady. "It's not just about Ashley. It's about you too. You chose to ignore the way she treated me. You chose to prioritize her over your own family, and you have to live with that. You have to face the fact that sometimes, the people we love can hurt us the most." Michael's face fell. And I saw the weight of his regret settle over him. He had never been one to shy away from responsibility, but this was different. This was about more than just him. It was about the family he had built, and the family he had broken apart. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'll do whatever it takes to make things right." I took a deep breath and sat down beside him. "Making things right isn't going to be easy, Michael. It's going to take time. But you can start by being honest with me and with yourself. You need to stop hiding behind Ashley's lies and start facing the truth, no matter how painful it is." We sat in silence for a long time after that, both of us processing the weight of the conversation. It was hard, harder than I'd ever imagined, but I knew that we were finally getting somewhere. Michael was ready to face the truth, and that was the first step toward healing. The next day, I received a call from Richard. His voice was calm, but I could tell something important had happened. "Sinead, I need to let you know that we've decided to take action with Ashley," Richard said. "Her lies have caught up with her, and I've been working with HR to make sure there are consequences for what she's done." I felt a surge of satisfaction, knowing that Ashley would finally have to face the consequences of her actions. For so long, I had felt like a silent observer in my own life, watching as Ashley manipulated the situation, using my vulnerability to her advantage. But now, the tables were turning. It was time for her to take responsibility for the mess she had created. "Good," I said, my voice steady. "She deserves to face the consequences. It's time for her to stop hiding behind lies." Richard agreed. "I'm glad you're on board with this. It's never easy to deal with someone you care about, but sometimes, the truth has to come out." As the days passed, things started to shift. Michael and I began to rebuild our relationship, slowly but surely. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't perfect, but we were making progress. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was no longer invisible. I wasn't just the mother-in-law everyone tried to ignore. I was a woman reclaiming her life, her dignity, and her voice. And then, just as things seemed to be falling into place, Richard asked me a question I wasn't expecting. "Sinead, I want to take you somewhere," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. "I know this has been a tough time for you, but I want you to know that I'm here for you. And I want to take you on a trip, a real trip this time. somewhere beautiful where you can relax and be yourself. I looked at him, surprised but touched by his gesture. Where are we going? I asked. Richard smiled. Paris, perhaps? I've always wanted to share that city with someone who truly understands the beauty of life. I felt a rush of emotions. After everything I had been through, I never imagined that I would find someone who cared about me the way Richard did. He had seen me for who I was, no pretenses, no lies. And now, he was offering me a chance to experience something beautiful, something real. I'd love that, I said, my heart swelling with gratitude. Paris sounds perfect. As the weeks passed, Richard and I planned our trip to Paris. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how much I had changed over the past few months. The woman I had been before, the one who had quietly put others' needs before her own, was beginning to feel like a distant memory. In her place was someone new, someone who was learning to prioritize herself, someone who was starting to embrace the freedom of living authentically. When we finally landed in Paris, it was everything I had hoped for and more. The city was alive with energy and romance, the streets lined with cafes where people sipped their coffee and watched the world go by. Richard and I spent our days exploring the city, visiting the Louvre, walking along the Seine, and dining in quaint bistros that felt like they were straight out of a movie. One evening, as we sat on a bench near the Eiffel Tower, watching the lights twinkle against the night sky, Richard turned to me with a thoughtful expression. You know, he said, this is exactly what I needed. I never realized how much I had been hiding from the world, just like you. We've both spent so many years putting up walls, pretending to be something we weren't, and now, here we are. I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through me at his words. I think we both needed to be reminded that it's never too late to change, I replied. To start living for ourselves, to let go of the things that held us back. Richard nodded, his eyes reflecting the city lights. Exactly. And I'm glad I found you, Saneda. You've made me realize that life isn't just about success or work, it's about connection. It's about living fully, with honesty and joy. His words meant more to me than I could express. In Richard, I had found someone who saw me, really saw me, for who I was, not just as someone's mother-in-law or as a woman stuck in the shadows. I felt valued in a way I had never known before, and that feeling was worth more than anything. The next few days were a whirlwind of beauty and discovery. We visited Montmartre, explored hidden gardens, and took a boat ride along the Seine. But it wasn't just the sights of Paris that made the trip unforgettable, it was the way I felt. For the first time in years, I was truly present in my own life, not just going through the motions. On our last evening in Paris, as we stood on the balcony of our hotel room overlooking the city, Richard turned to me with a serious look on his face. Saneda, he said softly, I know this has been a short time, but I feel like we've known each other forever. I want to be with you, truly be with you, not just as a vacation romance. I want to see where this goes. Will you be with me? I was taken aback by his words, but in that moment, I realized that I felt the same way. Richard had opened my heart in ways I never thought possible. He had helped me rediscover who I was, and I wanted to keep exploring life with him by my side. I would love to, I said, my voice steady, my heart full. Let's see where this takes us, Richard. Together. And in that moment, as we embraced under the stars of Paris, I knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter for me, one that was mine to write. When we returned home, things had changed. Michael reached out to me again. This time with a deeper understanding of everything that had happened. He was trying to repair his relationship with me, to make up for the years of neglect and misunderstanding. We began to rebuild our bond, slowly but surely. It wasn't easy, but it was progress, and that's all I could ask for. As for Ashley, the fallout from her lies and manipulations continued to unravel. I had no idea how much longer she would try to maintain her perfect facade, but I knew one thing: I was no longer going to be her scapegoat. She would have to face the consequences of her actions, just as I had faced mine. Richard and I continued to build our relationship, one day at a time. We weren't perfect. But we were honest, and that was enough for both of us. We made plans for the future, for more travels, more shared experiences, and more time spent enjoying each other's company. And as I looked back on everything, the pain, the betrayal, the loss, I realized that it had all led me to this moment. It had led me to the woman I had become, to the life I was now living, and to the love I had found. Sometimes, the hardest moments in life are the ones that push us toward the greatest transformations. And now, at 67, I was finally living a life that was all my own, one filled with love, adventure, and the freedom to be exactly who I was meant to be.